Chinese President Xi Jinping has left the mainland for the first time since the pandemic began 2 years ago.
Hong Kong is a city where East meets West.
我相信喺民主運動上面亦都有一定嘅角色。
This former British colony, now part of China, is a vibrant blend of cultures and contrasts. But the story of Hong Kong is still going on to this day, where they fight for democracy. To explain this very interesting story, we first have to understand tea. Now, the origin of tea is shrouded with myths and mystery, but it's believed that the plant originates in China. Legend has it that it was first discovered when a tea leaf fell into the Emperor Shennong's hot water while he was traveling in 2737 before Christ. He felt so refreshed after drinking the water with tea that he demanded his soldiers to bring him this new drink instead of water for the rest of his travels. China sold tea for many years. But many years later, another power started to emerge: Britain. Tea was, ironically, first introduced to Britain by a coffee house as early as 1657. Samuel Pepys is described trying tea for the first time in his diaries in 1660. He didn't like it. By the early 1700s, tea was quickly growing in popularity, and in 1773, the American Revolution started with the Boston Tea Party, showing the importance of tea in Britain. Britain kept growing and getting more powerful. Instead, China was getting less powerful. Britain came and started selling opium in China. However, China didn't like this. Chinese courts started to worry about this growing and intensive use. In the 1820s, it began seriously to prohibit opium imports. Bans entirely failed to stop Chinese people from growing or buying in increasing quantities. Now, you may be wondering, what's this got to do with tea? Well, quite simple. China was selling tea to Britain, but Britain wasn't selling anything to China. That's why they started selling opium to China. So, from the money they got from the opium, they would buy tea. The tension between the two sides increased in July, when some drunk British sailors killed a Chinese villager. War broke out later that year when British warships destroyed a Chinese blockade over Pearl River. The British government decided to send an expeditionary force to China, which arrived at Hong Kong. China tried to fight back, but failed when the British took Nanking. Quickly, negotiations started. In the treaty, it says, it being obviously necessary and desirable that British subjects should have some port where they may careen and refit their ships when required, and keep stores for that purpose. His Majesty, the Emperor of China, gives to Her Majesty the Queen of Britain Hong Kong Islands, to be possessed by Her Britannic Majesty, her heirs and her successors, and to be governed by such law and regulations as Her Majesty the Queens of Great Britain, etc., shall see fit to direct. Another thing mentioned in the treaty was that missionaries were allowed to travel through China and preach Christianity. The Christians were granted the right to freely practice their religion. Other nations were granted external territorial rights, meaning they were subject to the law of their own country rather than China's law. Then there was one more opium war. It's not as relevant to the story as the first opium war, but it's still important. In early October 1856, some Chinese officials boarded the British ship Arrow. They arrested several Chinese crew members and allegedly lowered the British flag. As a response, a British warship sailed up to Pearl River and began bombarding Canton. The French decided to join the British military expedition. They quickly captured Canton. In May 1858, Allied troops reached Taijin and forced the Chinese into negotiations. The Treaty of Taijin was signed, the opening several new ports. In further negotiations, the importation of opium was legalized. Was it over then? No. The British withdrew from Taijin in 1858, but when they returned in June 1859, the Chinese refused to let them pass by the Dagu Fort and proposed an alternative route to Beijing. The Chinese refused to sign treaties, and the Allies kept attacking. Eventually, the Beijing Convention was signed, in which China and Britain agreed to follow the treaties of Tianjin. China had to give Britain the Kowloon Peninsula right beside Hong Kong Island. In 1898, there was a convention speaking about the extension of the Hong Kong territory for Britain. It was signed that Britain would get the whole Hong Kong Peninsula for 99 years. Hong Kong during the British rule was center of international trade. The opium trade was a very important source of government funds. Hong Kong got invaded on the 8th of December 1941. The same year, on Christmas Day, the British took it back. Eventually, after 99 years for the whole Hong Kong and 156 for the Hong Kong Island, Hong Kong was handed back to China. Both parties agreed that Hong Kong would be able to govern themselves for 50 years after the agreement was signed. Hong Kong would become a special administrative region. The principle of one country, two systems allows Hong Kong to maintain its own legal system, legislative assembly, and economic policies separate from those from mainland China. So, even though Hong Kong is Chinese, it's semi-independent from the mainland China.
The biggest student demonstration this week in China was tonight.
On the streets leading down to the main road to Tiananmen Square, furious people stared in disbelief at the glow in the sky.
In 1989, the Chinese people were protesting against the government, so the government fought back.
The troops have been firing indiscriminately, but still there are thousands of people on the streets who will not move back.
And committed a massacre. Mainland China covered this up, like if it never happened. Instead, Hong Kong, being separated from the rest of China, once a year gathered in memorial. Until 2020, where it was banned. China said it was because of COVID-19, but it's still banned to this day. Other things related to this massacre have been removed in Hong Kong, like the Pillar of Shame, the Goddess of Democracy, and the June 4th Museum. They're different examples of what Hong Kong had before China stepped in and removed it. In 2014, China finally allowed Hong Kongers to vote their chief executive, basically a president. However, they made it so only candidates approved by China could participate. This is what started the umbrella movement that lasted for 79 days. Since 2019, Xi Jinping has been removing and adding restrictions to Hong Kong for it to be more Chinese. However, do Hong Kongers want to be Chinese? Well, these graphs say a lot. In 1982, there was a survey. 85% of Hong Kongers wanted to remain part of Britain. Now, currently, people do not want independence. However, they do want the one country, two systems to be extended. This is where the video ends, and I want to give my final statement. Hong Kong works very differently than China. They were introduced to democracy a long time ago. China is still a one-party system. I hope you enjoyed this video. It took me a very long time to make, so please consider subscribing and sharing it to your friends.
We shall not forget you, and we shall watch with the closest interest as you embark on this new era of your remarkable history.